So good morning once again. My name is Nikolaus Forgó. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you here, also everyone on the panel today. We have about 90 minutes time to discuss some of the most pending and most important, as I would say as a lawyer, most important topics that we have been dealing with in this project. And I'm very, very pleased to host this panel debate in the morning. And I will be very brief. I promise this to you. So the only thing that I'm going to do is that I do the order of presentations that I want to announce to you. I would suggest that the first person talking will be Martin, because Martin can give an overview about the project and where we stand on. And I don't need to introduce Martin, obviously, because he is the PI and coordinator and brain of this whole project. So Martin, please, you have the floor.
Okay, thanks, Nikolaus. First of all, thanks for organizing this wonderful venue here. COMMUTE, the COMMUTE project, and why does ethics and legal and patient rights matter? COMMUTE is about the long-term consequences of the pandemic. So essentially, everybody in this room probably had an infection with coronavirus. Is there anybody who didn't have? Okay. So we have all seen that virus, and we have experienced that there are different acute phenotypes, but we also are aware, more and more actually aware, of long-term consequences. This is partially post-COVID, as you know, but post-COVID is also difficult because it has such a wide spectrum of phenotypes, and it comes in really a broad spectrum of flavors. And the other thing is that we have seen, actually quite early in the pandemic, indication for consequences that directly affect the brain function. You may recall that people were complaining about loss of smell or so, which actually, for people who are in the Parkinson field, sounded very familiar. And that is just one half, that there's a link between, let's say, brain infecting COVID on one side, and changes in the brain that were also reported as even structural changes in neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation, on the other side, is a hallmark of neurodegenerative processes, and therefore we have good reason to assume that with the COVID pandemic, we actually may see an increased risk for development, progression of neurodegenerative diseases years after the pandemic. And this is not without precedence, because in the famous Spanish flu pandemic and in the early 20th century, we have seen similar effects. So, and that, to cut that short, there is a link between the virus infection, the pandemic on one side, and the putative potential higher risk for neurodegeneration in years to come. And the COMMUTE project has been started, bringing people together who can address that question on the implications of the COVID pandemic for a maybe surge of Parkinsonism and Alzheimer in the future. And this is exactly what we address at the, let's say, biomedical side of things, and we use a lot of AI, of course. One of the ethical implications of the entire project is that we may actually come up with a risk function, a risk score, that tells you, oh, you belong to a susceptible group of people, you belong to a vulnerable group of people, and you actually have a 1.7 times increased risk to develop Alzheimer compared to to other people. And that is that would be would have massive ethical implications. And that's exactly why we are sitting together, and that's why the work package 5 in COMMUTE is so important, where all the patient-centric aspects, the ethical aspects, and the legal aspects converge. And with that, I hope I was brief enough.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much for this. And now let's go into the psychiatric aspects of what we are talking about. I would like to introduce to those of you who haven't met her yet, Professor Sarah Bauermeister, who is a psychologist and has a professorship for cognitive neuropsychology in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Oxford. Sarah, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Martin, and everyone for inviting me to sit on this panel this morning and to consider these the important biopsychosocial elements of our investigations. So, as Martin outlined, we know that there are individuals that acquire different outcomes from the COVID-19 infection, and we have sophisticated modeling, we have AI modeling, especially within this project. We have fantastic work packages who are dedicated to these type of models. However, what we're really focused on at Oxford is to understand the psychosocial phenotype of these individuals. So we have the biological mechanisms, but people don't just come and acquire a COVID-19 infection as a biological mechanism. The psychosocial makeup of these individuals varies, and for example, they come with different socio-demographic backgrounds, they come with a different socio-economic status, different mental health profiles, and some of our work in Oxford, we're looking at people who've gone into the pandemic, acquired the COVID-19 infection, both pre, during, and post-pandemic, but they've come into it with this higher neuropsychological load. So in other words, they've either had anxiety, stress, depression, and then they acquire the COVID-19 infection, and they not only continue with the same psychosocial background or implications they came into the pandemic, but it's amplified. So so in other words, we're really trying to think about humanizing these AI models and thinking about the individual that acquires the COVID-19 infection. So that's the focus of our work in Oxford, and we are progressing that. We've worked on one study, and we're expanding that across different data sets to understand this profiling. So that's a bit of my background. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much. Next person to introduce to you is Joachim Maurice Mielert, who is here in his role as a representative of the Patient Safety Action Alliance, APS. Very happy to have you here, please.
Thank you. I'm speaking about patient safety. And when we will look back when we had in the COVID pandemic, the show act from patient safety, we had lockdown, we had masks and all so on, it all was part of patient safety. And patient safety must be the guideline in all healthcare policies. And when we think about the critical aspects, then we must also see this pandemic situation ended in a good situation. The patient safety was real. And the people did learn about patient safety more than all times before. And so I hope we can have a good bridge for patient safety in all healthcare policies. Our house in Berlin is opened for all. They want help to realize patient safety, And so I hope we can talk about patient safety in the middle of all aspects for legal and ethical ideas in the healthcare professional areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joachim. Last but not least, I may introduce Constanze Hübner to you. Constanze will share hopefully her insights and research work about her research institute, and in particular about the project in the turnaround in Alzheimer's dementia. Very much looking forward to see and to hear from you. Please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me here. Yes, I'm working in a project called Predictive, which is about the predictive turn in Alzheimer's dementia. And we're actually kind of at the end of our project, so I will probably refer to some of our results. We were investigating decision parameters of undergoing risk prediction and anticipated consequences of individuals. And I will elaborate on the ethical aspects.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I would like to organize this in the way that it's not just a panel talking, because this is obviously a little bit boring, but that it would also be mainly you from the very beginning. I will, however, start by just throwing one or two questions on the table, if you want. And then let's see what the panel is going to do with this, and let's see what the audience is doing with this. So the first question would be, that's more a story than a question. When you work in such projects, one of the issues that you constantly see is that European researchers doing something useful with their life, apart from struggling with lawyers, constantly complain that the legal environment in Europe is a disadvantage in comparison with other areas of the world, in particular when it comes to issues of patient safety, but also data protection, medical device regulation, you name it, and so on. And the question I have now to the panel is that, in my view, at least, a lot of those arguments are, of course, well-founded, and one can argue that such disadvantages exist in Europe. However, one might also argue that this is the very tradition of where Europe comes from, so that Europe, in its self-understanding, is the continent or the legislative system taking fundamental rights of, in particular, patients seriously. And my question to you now would be whether you see this disadvantage, this regulatory disadvantage of Europe in comparison with other areas of the world, and second, if you see it, whether you think that it's worth the price. Don't know. Martin.
If I may. I'm one of those, by the way, who complain all the time about overregulation. Yeah, so I'm a liberal by heart, and I see the need for people like Nikolaus, but I would love to have as little as much as involvement of legal constraints and boundaries and so on in research, which is quite natural for people who, I think, like me, who are who want to move forward in science, who want to find out, and then they find all these contracts that you have to do to get some data or so. This is all slowing down stuff, and this is where some of the frustration comes from on the side of science. Nikolaus, you mentioned one point, which is Europe. Europe is massively regulated in all the aspects that you mentioned, and I've heard recently a presentation some while ago, a presentation by Thomas Sattelberger, who was Secretary of State in Berlin before, and who was talking about this ex ante and ex post regulation, and a very fundamental distinction between, for instance, the US and Europe. So what US and also the British system, by the way, are very often trying things out, and then when consequences of a more liberal approach to new technology are surfacing, they try to regulate as a consequence of that effect that the new technology causes. So they see that rather as an experiment that you run and then you correct afterwards. What we do in Europe, in the EU in particular, is we anticipate, and that the AI Act and others are examples for that, we anticipate what could happen actually before a new technology is really implemented, and then we regulate it already, and based on anticipation what could go wrong. And when I'm provocative, and I'm very often provocative, then I say in Germany, like the German way of data protection is killing people every day. Every day in Germany, people are dying because of data protection. The way we do it. I know, and I know your argument, Nikolaus, that the GDPR actually enables things, it makes things possible, but it also, the legal side, the official legal side is one thing. The attitude of people towards regulation is the reality, is the real reality. And when you look into Germany at least, it is so much easier not to try to be compliant with all the regulations and just ignore, that this data set, it's too much hassle to organize it. It's too much hassle to collect all these data and to go through, all the procedures like a data protection plan and the impact assessment and all that. And I've done that myself. That was only possible with a lawyer next to me. So it's too much hassle, and what you do as a consequence as a researcher is you drop the ball. You just don't bother. You don't want to get so much into this legal stuff, and you don't want to write endless, fill in endless tables and so on for the data protection plan and the data protection impact assessment, and therefore we have a culture of not doing as a consequence. So the legal side is one thing. The reality of the data economy or the data sharing is the other side. Just to set the, the viewpoint from Ole.
So maybe directly on this point, because you introduced that so nicely, I would have a more like a differentiated view, taking into account the presentations that we saw yesterday, right? So we've seen the situation in Luxembourg, and we've seen the data that was presented from Denmark. So I think there are examples in Europe where actually we can, retrieve incredible information from these cohorts and from the patient data. And I'm often wondering, so it's not this black and white. It works in the US, but it doesn't work in Europe. But actually there are examples in Europe where it works phenomenally, as we've seen yesterday. So what is different in the different European legislations in your view, maybe in UK, in Austria, I don't know, and why does it work in some countries and why not in others? Is it, as you say, is it just an organizational thing, or is it the legal framework to this, or is it, what is it? Maybe you have an answer to this. Sorry.
We could have shared one here. Joachim, you want to answer?
Thank you. Since the beginning of this year, I had to read 5,000 sites of paper for new regulations for healthcare situations in Germany. 5,000 pages. And the problem I see is we do not find a way to select this 5,000 pages to 500 pages. And when we learned this to realize what is the situation in Denmark, for example, then we are on a better way. And in this moment, just in this moment, in Berlin, there are most important situations. I think we find a way to help the people to understand the assets of patient safety. And we will learn to realize that 500 pages are enough, but that is a cultural process, I think. We have that is a situation for a new culture, and so I hope it will go on in the next time.
Maybe as a direct, you may have, for those who witness or who follow a little the discussions, we have, at least in Germany now, the data minimalism principle, which is one of the guiding principles in data protection. So you should always use as little data as possible, and they now start discussions on whether this is still the right time to say data minimalism in the times of big data, yeah, and large observational stuff and questions that you ask once you have the big data. The problem is getting access to collecting big data without having a super clear idea what you all want to do with it, and that is really something where, as a consequence, let's just look at the phenotype. We didn't establish a data economy really in Europe, in Germany not at all, but not in Europe. We don't put price tags onto clinical trial data, despite the fact there are good data and bad data, and we would pay more for good data than we would pay for poor data. So we avoid actually basic principles of economy in the data space, and this is where we would need them, because good data are extremely valuable. And if you give people who generate good data money for the data, they can produce even more good data, okay? And this is a mechanism we have destroyed from the onset on. We don't do that. And I think this is completely wrong. We should actually trade data.
Yes, I'll take this one. There was a mention there that, different countries, whether it's UK or Germany, and are there differences? Is it institutional differences? Is it cultural differences? And I think I don't represent the whole of the UK, definitely not, but I'm senior scientist for Dementia's Platform UK, and we've been going 10 years now. We are a platform of over 65 population and clinical cohorts across 3.5 million individuals. So these are cohorts who entrust us as a repository to look after their data for research, repurposed secondary data analyses. And, we've been doing this for 10 years. We've been developing training programs, publicity programs with the public, a data curation program. And I can honestly say that after 10 years, we're starting to see that the culture, it's all about trust. And if you can create trust with data owners, data providers, you create trust with funders of those data sets, and that filters through to the public. But it doesn't happen overnight. This is 10 years. We don't think we're there yet. We're hoping for another 5 years, but it's definitely a incremental development of building an environment of trust and information for the public, for the funders and data owners. So I think that's our experience.
Please.
I think you're very right, by just one note. You speak about economically and data and all that, but I think we need to add another word, which is the part of the collection and the part of the research or analysis. And that stands one by one, and this is really, what we are up to be, and we just had two words or one word, reliability, because you have to build it from the beginning on the way that you can be reliable and that the outcome will be, towards the patient and towards the treatment and towards everything, the way as reliable as possible these days, and I hope we will be even better in the future. So this is because we are still misleading in a lot of diseases and a lot of things, and we are on the way, but still it has to be in our mind as one main factor. And the other things you were talking about, AI, and I don't think that the translation to AI, and it's the same like the data, it's not well established enough. We are not there to try and to utilize AI instead of human behavior or human values. It's still far away. And I hope we won't lose our human values for the AI.
Actually, I heard two things here that I would like to go a little bit deeper, if you agree. The first one is this 5,000 pages issue that I heard. And I must confess that I fully share this experience, although I'm a professional academic who is paid for reading all this. And although I'm a professional academic being paid for reading all this, I can't. It's so much coming that I no longer can try to keep an overview about what's coming. And again, I have two questions about this. The first one is, why is this? So where is this all coming from? And I may also say that since 2,000 years, lawyers have been complaining about that it's getting more and more and more information. So there seems to be some kind of law in this, that there needs to be more laws. So why is this? And the second question on this would be how to change this. So how should the law then further develop in order to avoid this? This is the legal question. And then I also have a fundamental question, which is the other point that I would like to highlight again, which is this trust issue. Because I completely agree, if I may, that trust is the single currency that is relevant when it comes to whether or not patients are willing to share information and data and so on. And that the question that I would like to ask here is whether you think that Europe or European researchers, European projects such as ours deserve this trust as we stand at the moment, or whether we would need to do things differently or more intensely in order to earn this trust in a better way. Again, I don't know who wants to.
Let me say, when we talk about a new culture, it is necessary to speak about new culture. And I think the best way to find to a new culture is the shared decision making between the patient and the doctors. And when we find for a new way of communication, then we find to this trust you talked about. And I think it's the best way to talk about shared decision making in all areas from medicine. And then is the second to speak about the rendite, you know?
Yeah, payoff.
Yeah,
return of investment.
The return of investment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe one remark on that, because Mira was mentioning AI and that it may be too early. I think we see now actually a lot of foundational models for various things. I've learned about foundational models on histology slides. So you know, there's this histology that you do with higher throughput. It's not really high throughput, but it's higher throughput where you do sections and you have them automated, analyzed, and so on. And now you accumulate so much data that you can actually build a foundational model, which is a expression that you use when you have so much data that the AI is covering that world, essentially. That's representing, really, that model represents that domain. And we see that now for electronic patient records being built, for histology. We will see it for, you know, the genome itself, the genome sequence and all the variation and all that. And whenever you have that, you can actually use it in a generative fashion, which means you can synthesize new data, which are an output of that model and of the representation of the entire world, of the entire domain. And then you have actually, that's at least our hope, a playground to do a variety of simulations and play with those data without corrupting any of the, or negatively influencing the rights of one of the contributors to that foundational model. There is things like differential privacy and so on that we have to take care of, but again, if you blur the individual sufficiently in these big foundational models, then the risk of doing harm to, this is about doing harm essentially, the breach of confidentiality or the breach of privacy in the data field is about being malicious in a sense, because typically we are driven by the good, I would claim for us, and we are trying to find means of interventions, of healing, of correcting a disease state. So I think for the good, actually, we can and we should be allowed to use those, at least synthetic data to a large extent, also with the idea that we build trust and that we build a best practice on utilizing these data. In the current situation with somebody sitting, I mean, Søren is sitting on all the Danish data, and that's a wonderful position for him. Really, I mean, you have listened to his overview on the data and what you can see there, all the trajectories you can see. This is individual passes through time and through diagnosis keys and so on and measurements. Fascinating. We would actually need that European-wide. Yeah, this is coming back to what Ole said. Why is it in some countries? Why is it not in others? Trust and the societal culture, essentially, play a major role. I think it's not surprising that in the Scandinavian countries and in the UK it works much better than in other countries. There is some rationale behind that. But I'm not, I don't want to go too far into that. Coming back to the AI, I have some hope that with generating large cohorts, maybe even in a distant day, a representation of entire mankind in sort of simulated twins or a Grundgesamtheit, a collection of virtual patients that you can play around with in the best sense without compromising any real existing patient. That is actually my dream, and that will overcome, hopefully, a lot of the limitations that we see currently.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to the shared decision-making aspect, which I totally agree with, of course. But I think also from an ethical point of view, it's important to realize that we have to let go as researchers and also healthcare professionals to let go of this almost paternalistic view between, or hierarchy between patients or research objects and researchers or individuals from the general population as a whole. So this is one thing. And besides the cultural thing, I would also say it's something educational, not meaning educational in a traditional way. I would not say the Germans are less educated than Danish people, of course. But I think if you have very strict regulations, legal regulations, it also implies on some level that these are necessary because something could happen, some cyber attack or something else in this respect. So I think the strict regulations also imply danger, which also is not good for trust in the general population. And I think this is what people in the German society, for example, feel. That's just something I wanted to add.
Thank you. Very, very interesting discussions on Brunak from Denmark. Now Denmark has been mentioned a few times, so I thought I would say a little bit. I mean, it was mentioned before that, and I think it was Martin mentioning this data minimalism request that comes from the legal side, and I think it's a symptom on all the problems we have, or at least many of them, because that's a very simple way the legal people say, okay, then we minimize the risk, but then they forget about whether the data set actually can be used to improve patient safety. If you would like to look at polypharmacy, for example, then you need to see many drug combinations in order to find out which drug combinations are not good for the patient. So it doesn't help you to look at 10,000 patients, and that's how I got my permissions in Denmark to say I need data for 10 million people, and we are only 6 in Denmark, but we also have data on 4 million dead people, to get the statistics so that we actually can discover something new. And I think that's a good example of how we should fight the legal constraints that you also mentioned, because the scientific question and what we actually need to get out of this data analysis should not be overshadowed by a minimalism principle. Actually, to the ethical committee in Denmark, I often say you should refuse this application because they ask for too little data. So it should be the other way around. I would also say just one quick comment to Martin, what you said about commercialization, because I think we've seen in the US that electronic patient record data sets are commercialized, and it doesn't seem to solve the problem. And it especially will not solve the problem of linking the health data to the socioeconomic data. I talked yesterday about how we can link the health records to people's grades in school, because they are held within Statistics Denmark in a public system. And that has impact on health literacy, that again has impact on patient safety and so on. So I think commercialization is good for many things, but here where we need to get into this new era where we say any data are health data. And I think it's hard to commercialize ourselves out of that. And I think it's good to think about whether things could be commercialized. But I think US is a good example of deconnected data, even in the same city and so on, because they are commercialized and they are kept in silos. So I'm not sure that that's the perfect model. But minimalism, let's try to fight that one.
Since we've entered the age of AI, and coming back to this 5,000 page problem, couldn't be AI a way to actually come together? You know, from the legislation perspective, because you have a clear input from the legal background, you have a patient advocacy view, what you want to achieve, you have the data side of things. Couldn't that be a tool to kind of reduce all these complex views into a coherent path forward, to change trust and to have that AI assisted to come to better ways to amalgamate all these different perspectives?
So I recently suggested that to my bosses, so to speak, the headquarters of Fraunhofer. And I said, you have so many documents in the administrative space, also in the administrative legal space. Why don't we use that and retrain actually a large language model, and then it writes these reports. We spend a lot of qualification plans and whatsoever. So we can automate that process by a large language model. And the same, actually, the legal AI is a topic now. So AI in legal is actually a research topic. It's still, I think, underfunded, but I would envision a world in which machines talk to or negotiate with machines about contracts or so, or NDAs at least, stuff like that, yeah. So or data usage contracts, yeah. So that actually would be maybe one way out of this flood. But the other aspect is, of course, why should we ever accept this flood of regulation? Because isn't it that this machine that spills out these new papers, these thousands of new regulations and whatsoever, that Joachim and Nikolaus both say we can't keep pace with that, yeah? Where's the point of such a machine? Shouldn't we slow down the machine? or do both and have, slow down and I would actually question total whether this fine granular regulation of everything is making the world any better. My experience is no, clearly no. There were times when mankind needed 10 commandments, and that was it. Or Hammurabi or whatever, the earliest law books, yeah? So there was a limited number of cases or scenarios, and they regulated that. In the meanwhile, we have something like 90,000 laws and executive, orders. And this is, you need text mining, you need AI to cope with that. There's no reasoning that works there's no machine-based reasoning that works over legal regulations, despite the fact that it's a rule-based system, which should make things easy. Yeah, I'm a text miner, so I'm now in my central turf. Anyway, so I'm not sure. I could envision that AI actually solves some of the 5,000 pages problem, or makes it manageable. But I would ask, shouldn't we address the core problem, which is the machine that spills out so much of these papers?
You talked about Thomas Sattelberger, yes? and he saw 50,000 sites, and then he went home. That's the situation.
Yeah.
Could I come back perhaps to this data minimization topic and also to the Denmark example, if I may, because I think that one of the very fundamental learnings in Germany after 1933 to 1945 was that data that is existing somewhere can be misused for purposes that are not on the agenda or even on the horizon of people developing systems. And that was one of the main reasons why Germany was so early in adopting data protection laws in the 70s already, and why this data minimization topic is one of the most important topics under all the important topics when it comes to data protection. And the basic idea behind this, in my view at least, is you never know what can happen with data. And my question now to Denmark is, why is it that this very fundamental concern that states might change and that state institutions might erode and that data can be used for completely different things, why this is not that dominant in Denmark, and where this trust into the public institutions in Denmark comes from? Is this because Danish democracy is better accepted or further developed than in other areas of Europe, or is it that you just don't see that as important as we do? We do, meaning the German-speaking Europeans do.
Comment on that, but because this is a really good question, and I think the answer is IT technology, because in contrast to Germany, Denmark started out to digitalize society much before Germany, and data protection was a technological aim and not just something that was passed over to legal frameworks that could protect data. So using secure private clouds for health data that can talk to each other and protect data via technology and infrastructure, that has been on the agenda in Denmark from the 60s. We got our personal identification number in 1968. And that number is used to connect data across modalities. So I think the main answer is that investing in technological means of protecting data, that generates confidence with the public. It's not that we are not having sometimes minor leaks. There hasn't been any major leaks, but that's the fundamental answer to the question, and also the big difference to Germany. And I fully understand the history here, but that shouldn't, I think, keep Germany away from actually using technology to protect it. We can see with the banks, they are quite good at protecting what they have. They use, on average, 7 times as much funding for protecting a petabyte of data than we use in healthcare in the public sector. So it is a matter of investment in the technology, and then it's fairly safe. I'm not saying banks also would not occasionally have problems, but I mean, it's that angle we need to discuss, and of course it's also a matter of what the taxpayers can afford.
Just as a direct response, the banks have no problem to tell you what the value of what they protect is, because it's money and it's direct value, you know. So if you would put a price tag to data, actually, you would actually have a good reason, because everybody understands why that is valuable. I mean, this is the other side of the coin. We pretend always with the health data and the health system that it's non-commercial, that it is not, you know, driven by money, but actually it is massively driven by money. We try to hide that somehow. And I think that is also a cultural thing, on a cultural difference, where healthcare data are being treated as something that you have, actually you get it for free or you don't get it at all. And what the result is, you never get it. Here in Germany at least. So that is really an issue. Otherwise, very impressive to hear this number of 7-fold higher investment. That's very, for my next discussions, very, very helpful. By the way, the Germans have a unique identifier as well. Because when you have a newborn child in Germany, what you instantly get is a message from the tax office, and they give you a text. 2 days after birth, you get the tax number. So the state is very good in providing a unique ID when it goes about getting
But
money.
that's the same in Denmark. We actually get it before birth because you cannot die in Denmark without the number. It's how pervasively it's used. It's the same number for your gas bill, for your car, for your kindergarten, for your tax. So it's the same number across all societal sectors. And that also brings down the cost of public administration. And that was actually the main motivation in the 60s for going into the digitization. That was to reduce taxes, because Danes pay high taxes, and we would like to lower them, and that was the motivation.
Absolutely, that's complete right. But please let us find back to the real life situation. There is a patient, there is a culture, there is a big regulation pack, there is a brown bag with questions for the patient. A big brown bag with questions for the patient. And the answers, they must be easy and slow and fast. But the background is not easy, and that's a problem. And in this time, we're searching for politicians. They are giving smart and slow and fast answers. That's a problem I see. And the culture to find to one ident number is a very difficult way in Germany, because Sie müssen mir helfen mit der Übersetzung. In Deutschland hat alles seine Ordnung.
Yeah, there's always order.
And
in Germany, it's driven by order.
Und jedes System hat seine eigenen Ordnungsregeln.
Yeah, and each individual system has its own ordering principles. So
That's a problem I see.
Okay. Yeah, each system has its own ordering principles, and everything is driven by order. Actually, it was the ordering system, because Nikolaus was referring to that is the Holorit system, for those who are a bit in history. Holorit was a German company that was building searchable it was a machine to search actually little cards with your personal information, where you live and so on. It was an IBM company in Germany, and the Nazis used that to find the addresses and individuals. So, and that for me shows that you can use this ordering and this digitalization for the good and the bad. What Sören was saying was actually an example for using a unique identifier for the good, because he can answer questions that otherwise you couldn't answer. And I think that the fundamental, you know, of course you could limit a technology and try to avoid the bad use, the malicious use, but given the potential for good use of the technology, for me ethically it's questionable whether it's justified to, you know, to actually slow down on the technology side. We should probably rather build in safety measures to avoid malicious use of that. Just limiting, I mean, I understand why the principles of limited information and minimum information, why that came into the place. But given the good we can do with integrated big data, I challenge you on whether this is still a valid principle. Historical, I see the point, but I would rather want to live in a society which is actually aware and woke, so to speak, on abuse of data and controlling, as a patient's controlling usage of patient data. And we are getting there more and more. I mean, you have autonomy over your own data, and doctors have to provide you with data in digital form in the meanwhile. So all that has been installed. I think we have to take the next steps.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I actually just would like to add some comments on the things you just mentioned, that you see there are different orders between certain systems and, for example, between different countries or areas. I think there's one way now become more and more popular in terms of this type of, let's say, difference in the data protection or privacy, and even in the regulation level, which I guess some of you heard about. It's called federated analysis. So I think this type of principle could be applied and could help, at least to some degree, to the issues we are discussing here. And yeah, I think that's the thing I would like to add here. Yeah.
So yes, I agree with the federated approach. So going back to this idea of minimal data and trying to answer a question, what happens then is you have a researcher who can only ask for a minimal data set, therefore there is minimal information about, say, the background of that individual, exposures and outcomes. They're only going for a select amount of information, therefore the models that are applied to that minimal data set are immediately biased to that very small specific range of values, and it doesn't give the whole picture. And with Dementia's Platform UK, our core funding went into infrastructure. It went into data security. Researchers can't download the data. It's secure to ISO 27001. And all the funding and investment is to create this secure environment so that data owners, or in the future linkage, they know that the data are in that secure environment, and we look favorably on a researcher that comes along with a good proposal that requests a broad range of representative data points to answer a question. And I think that we're now looking to the future, which is federation. We have not only DPUK is it's a global platform, a little bit biased, I think it's very good, but there are other platforms. There is the ADDI Workbench, Dementia's Platform Australia, there's EPND, there is the LLC. So we've got all these platforms, these trusted research environments, and now where we're investing is interoperability of secure data platforms, and that is through federation. You run your code on your data set in one platform, and then that code can be securely run in other platforms. There is no movement of data across these well-established platforms. And I think that's where the investment needs to come to build increased trust and about privacy.
Yeah, please.
Yes, so I just also wanted to make a comment on trust and on how the centralization of data and the aggregation of more and more data on individuals. I think there is currently also this push in the EU to have this European health data space, right, where all the electronic health record data will go in and so on. And here, this is also something I think as an individual, your data is going to be used in this health space. There's no objection mechanism foreseen, which makes sense because you want to have all this data and have it there. But there's also no real transparency mechanism foreseen in this kind of database where you as an individual are not able to query in which research projects, in which industrial partnership projects your data actually is going to be used because, and this is a quote from one of these open meetings that there was, that would be too much of a hassle on the infrastructure level, which I find ridiculous as a statement. And I think this is something where you are losing the trust of the people because you can tell the same story. You're saying we're using this, you can look where your data contributes to, where your contribution helps to improve healthcare, to improve medicine. And I think this is an important step also that's overseen from the regulatory side, because you can build trust or lose it at these early steps.
I just want to add one thing regarding what was said here, that unlike the banks and all that, it's not straight line, like you said, Sarah, now, with patient. And we have to find a way to, combine AI and the research and in our current limitation, because I don't want to let us down because the research is more important and so on, and what you suggested is right, to separate and to keep the two rules, the reliability and keep the patient, but also we have to look direct and say that, as I said, money as direct lines or structures or other things, equipment, patient, people are not direct line. And we have to keep the reliability. In the other way, the privacy and the ability to predict it the right way and to provide in research. Because we still are modest. We are very small in research and we know very little. But the AI can help and the other equipment can help, and we have to combine the research with the equipment in the right, very moderate and very sensitive way.
Yeah, so I think the recurring theme is the trust and in the government, but we know that European citizens trust a lot of their data to very often foreign corporations, and they are not without a blink of an eye in many cases. And I think that some sort of a summary of why it may work in Denmark and why it doesn't work in other countries. For instance, in Poland, the biggest insurance companies largely owned by the state. So people are, I think, also concerned that if their health data will be accessible to the state, it will be also accessible to the insurance company. And here we know that it's really a gold mine of data for anybody who wants to calculate your insurance. So I think that this trust is something that needs to be built over time, and in many places we have a long road to walk. But at the same time, what is kind of recurring is the convenience or the usefulness of actually sharing the data. So if you are sharing the data, but then the system works much better in the country, so it's easier to apply for a kindergarten, or you at some point cannot really do this unless you are joining the network. Or if you are using some products, like we have wearable devices, there are companies that collect data on our heart rate and respiration rates, and we kind of trust all this data to Garmin's and Google's and Apple's of this world, because it provides some perceived value to the patients. We are all patients. So I believe that this is one point that may be overlooked in this, let's say, patient-related or trust-related questions. You know, what value is actually in short term and in the long term provided and communicated to the patients?
I totally agree. I think communication is like a key factor in this respect. And yeah, I think if you put money on data privacy, what was said before, this can be really dangerous. So the way of trust and communication is equally important, and this is oftentimes overlooked in my opinion. And yeah, with the Danish example, I think that's a very good example to go forward to, also in Germany, I think. I don't know, maybe in the UK it's the same, it's different?
Yes, I think that the whole thing with privacy, and I think sometimes there's a blur between privacy and data security and individual identity. And I think until these are very clearly defined, and I don't think they're clearly defined enough, so yeah.
Yeah, please. Okay, I will ask or I make my point, and then it's up to you. I would like to come back to this IT security point, because I think IT security and federation point. IT security, of course, is an appropriate instrument, and of course it's expensive, but it is about unauthorized usage of data. So roughly speaking, this is about somebody or preventing somebody of breaking the law. The issue I'm talking about is what is if the law changes, right? So that is what happened during 1933 and 1945. Suddenly it was perfectly appropriate to use this data for identifying Jews. And why are we that certain that that might not happen in Europe again? We have seen quite some examples, and some of them were already mentioned here, where fundamental principles of Western civilizations are suddenly broken. And my question is, I mean, one of the things I consider is how could we prevent such a situation that is unpreventable or unforeseeable by definition, perhaps. First remark. Second remark about this data federation thing and the AI topic. I mean, one of the very few things that I think I understand about AI is that you need plenty of data in order to develop something, right? So we will need to solve this somehow, that there will be players having access to plenty of data, otherwise we will be outcompeted. So I don't think that this federation will help us about that problem either, yeah.
It is not a future issue being outcompeted. We are already being outcompeted now. So just to make that clear, when it comes to the large language models or so, you can directly see how little Europe has to on the European side compared to what the dynamics that the large language model business developed in the US and also in China. So that race that is through, and the New York Times tried to sue OpenAI for using their text corpora or so. Yeah, you can do that, and then it's a lawyer's game in the US, and it can take a long time, and then they pay $1 billion or whatever. But the attitude in the US is just do it, and look for the consequences, the legal consequences later, and that makes the difference.
May I just share with you very briefly one example? I'm a member of the advisory board of the Austrian government in data protection, and somewhere in early 2019 there was the political plan that vaccinations should be put into a central database, and there were public health reasons given by the government why this would be important. It would be important that the government knows about whether a person is vaccinated against flu or not. It was very simple to get that through. Absolutely nobody really was concerned about this. Everyone was in Parliament was agreeing to this, and then suddenly COVID appeared, and within a year, this database was a precondition for the then obligatory vaccination of the Austrian population. So Austria was one of the very few countries, as you might know, that introduced an obligation to get vaccinated against COVID. It was never executed, but the law was existing. And the technological requirement in order to chase people, whether or not they are vaccinated, was this law that was introduced just a year before that, right? And suddenly it had a completely new dimension, obviously, and nobody had foreseen this before. But that's probably just an anecdote.
Yeah, I actually would like to add the comments on what Sarah was talking in the UK system. If I remember correctly, there's a very famous data, let's say, commercialization example, which is UK Biobank. I think, some of us could learn something from there if we really, at a certain moment, would like to promote the so-called data economic at a certain stage. According to my understanding, the UK Biobank has considered, very clearly data privacy, data security, because otherwise, how they can charge us, charge others. Here, someone sitting here must know that it's quite a substantial charge. It depends on how many individual information you want to use and which type of information you want to use. I think the GDPR and this type of data protection and minimalization at a certain stage will contribute to the data economic system, because imagine now you just simply say, okay, whoever would like to download or upload whatever the information you would like to have, then this so-called data economic will never come. And so I just want to, let's say, add this from this angle. I think this is important. Yeah, thanks.
Can I briefly, I would like to open a new frontier now, because actually when we prepared for this panel here, we had a call, we means Nikolaus and Rodessa and Sarah, and me, just talking about what would be, interesting. And in the course of that discussion, we actually realized that we very often we debate about data, and in particular patient-level data, and treat it more and more in the wording like a thing, This is something that I realize also in this discussion. It happens easily. It happens to me as well. We talk, we need data. And we forget about somehow, at least to a certain extent, that this is always humans behind. And now I'm not that, people who know me know that I'm clearly not woke or so. I'm not making, a fuss about humans just because humans, I think, there's actually, from the technological AI perspective, there's very good reason to see the human behind the data. So there's algorithmic reason, there's modeling reason, rational, to keep that in mind. And Sarah was actually making that point on the diversity of the input data. When we say data, very often we treat it as a somewhat homogeneous, monolithic block of, but they are actually, this is a mosaic, this is a very fine, painting with lots of little color paints here and there, so more a Van Gogh type of picture, and then we forget actually about the differences between the population we investigate that existed before, for instance, the virus struck us. So there were people who were already at risk, was indicated by other features, by rich data actually, that Sarah was calling for, and you can only put them or recognize their strata that existed before you modeled them, before they have seen the virus, if you have rich data. And if you look actually in soft features, yeah, behavioral features, economic status feature and whatever. So we came up in a discussion actually with something like how cool it would be to have something like an ethics-aware AI. And that's actually, I want to brand that in a COMMUTE context, that we, in the work package 5, actually move forward with the idea, and we need you, Joachim, for that very much, for ethics-aware AI that is avoiding to do this dimension reduction on the human being, essentially, yeah? That is one point I just wanted to bring up, because it's really something. And I'm more a technocrat type of person, I admit that, but it struck me actually. And our discussion was really wonderful. It was enlightening for me.
And then there's one point more. We know there is a human, he needs help. And then is coming a car with blue lights on the roof. And all some people are coming and help. And in the issue of data, we must learn to need a car with blue lights on the roof. We have no time to lose, and that's, I think, and I hope that is a message from COMMUTE for the politics in all countries. We have no time to implement the databases in the medicine. And when it's, please help me with die Sonderrechte, die ein Krankenwagen hat.
Oh yeah,
ja?
Privileges that an emergency car has.
Die müssen übersetzt werden in die politische Arena der Benutzung von Daten.
I see the point. So the analogy that Joachim makes here is that you have an emergency rescue team in a car that has, you know, the blue light and it has privileged rights. When it drives on the street, everybody gives way, yeah, for them, for a good reason, because they have to be fast. And the same he wants to see on the data side and the data utility side. I interpret it like this, so that we have the same notion, the same awareness that we typically have on the street when this car comes with the horn and the blue light and alerts us, give way, yeah. And the same he wants to see in the data space and the AI space. Very good.
May I just put some water into this wine, if I may? Because if you come up with such a suggestion, okay, and you put this into the political arena somewhere in Brussels, there will be people arguing, yes, this is very important, we need to prioritize research, and there is a patient interest, and people are dying, and blah, blah. And then there will be the data protection official stating this does not work, and there is the purpose-binding principle, and we need to have democratic control, and blah, 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 blah. Everyone will start, and then you end up with another 100 pages of text, right? You end up with another 100 pages of text because you need to find some kind of compromise, and the compromise is, of course, a lot of text, and then in the very specific pain points, right? So what really do we want to prioritize? So is the ambulance also allowed to drive 150 in the city center? Because it's more important that this patient survives than putting 10 other people at risk or not. So those pain points are not answered in those 100 pages of law because there is no agreement on them. So how do we, I mean, this is exactly what we see, I think, right? When you look into the AI regulation, this is exactly what we see. There are people arguing, this is important, we are back, we need to speed up, blah, and then there are others, we are concerned, there are risks, blah, and the outcome is 100 pages of text, no proper answer to any of the pain points, because if there is an answer to the pain point, there is no agreement anymore.
There is a knowledge and trust for the blue lights you must think about.
Yeah, just a comment about this. The problem is that some of those pain points, at least some, are already known and people is absolutely aware about that, but still there are, like barriers and, difficulties. And I'm specifically referring, for instance, to the AI. And this is also referring to a couple of comments before. I would be cautious with an over-reliance on, the solutions that AI can provide, because of these biases and all those problems, no? And also the fact that at the end of the day, those systems are trained on, selected data, and then they are just, containing partial information, and can be biased and can lead to discrimination. So at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, for instance, we work a lot on sex and gender biases in artificial intelligence, and this is one of the pain points that there is already a lot of discussion from many years, and so but why there is still not done in that direction? Then there's going to be a 1,000 other pain points, but at least let's start from somewhere, you know what I mean? Yeah.
But this is a very important point. What we're talking about now is the time constants that you have technology innovation and technology change, and then we have the general debate and the mechanism that Nikolaus was highlighting was, in Brussels, and the different fractions and the different perspectives, and then they produce paper and not necessarily a pragmatically usable recommendation or so, or a new way. So there's dramatic time differences between the discourse about some new innovation and the innovation itself. There's, by the way, no innovation in human mankind, in history of human mankind, that parallels the dynamic of the OpenAI, the GPTs. There's no parallel, the adoption by usage, and integration of large language models and GPT into other services and applications in various fields, and whether they make sense or not, but there's no parallel. So this was ultra fast because it was all within 2 years or so. Yeah, that is, and it dramatically changed a lot of things, how we do things. Even, all in the humanities, when you study some subject in humanities, and you have been asked to write, to sit down at home and write a summary or type of paper on a certain subject, and that is now done by ChatGPT in a wonderful way, and they essentially changed the way how they educate and raise people in the humanities now. Just as an example, but there's many more. And I think we have to also adopt in our discourse to the new time constants, because otherwise we are being really overrun. I think the public and legal discourse is too slow, and we need to be more brave somehow to try things out and also to take back. So, but the example that Nikolaus made, this is really wonderful, because there was this vaccination register, and then you all of a sudden have a situation where it backfires, and then we need the people need to stand up, I think. They're waiting for your representative in the parliament, member of parliament and so on, taking the appropriate action and so on. I'm not sure whether the dynamics of tech innovation are compatible with the processes of discourse we have. I'm skeptical.
Just a quick comment. I think it's really important to bring the time aspect in, as you all did, and the blue lights on the ambulance. And I think we could just mention one example, and that was the introduction of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. And we should remember that it was data from 2 small countries, Denmark and Norway, that made us pull the vaccine. We could see that we got more side effects out of the vaccine in Denmark than it would actually kill more people than it would save. So we pulled the vaccine. From the UK, they actually had 10 times as much data. They said Denmark and Norway would regret it. We didn't regret it because, of course, also from the UK there was a conflict of interest in terms of marketing this vaccine. But I think it's a good example of how high quality data brought in without legal restrictions, because we also have a lot of mess in Denmark with legal restrictions and so on, but they were all lifted so that these data could be analyzed immediately so that we could see how many side effects would we have. And remember also that it was healthcare personnel who were the first to be vaccinated, and they got the side effects, and the casualties were in that group of people. So I think bringing in the blue lights, I think it's a super analogy, and I hadn't thought of it, but I hope it's okay to steal. Thank you.
So we are perfectly on time. I think there is plenty of food for thought that we just got here in order to digest this. I think we have a coffee break now, do we? Yes. So I will let you out for the coffee in a second, but before that, please give the panel a warm hand. I think it was excellent. Thank you so much. So enjoy coffee.